Okay, everybody, thank you again for joining the Open Source Frontiers podcast. I'm here with Lucy Colden from the Polkadot ecosystem, very much a governance architect and all kinds of decentralized program sustainability efforts. I'm just so excited you agreed to come on. And why don't you introduce yourself, Lucy? I won't do all the talking.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I have, I would say, seen the good, the bad, the ugly of decentralization. And I think, like yourself, I'm committed to continuing to talk about it and work within this kind of framework. So I hope that we'll have some good conversation here today and get some minds whirring.
Yeah, exactly. Well, how did you get started? Because blockchain is maybe 10, 15 years old, give or take. And you have experience prior to that. What was your journey before it got you into the whole Web3 decentralization aspects?
Yeah, so I was actually aware of Bitcoin right from the very beginning, right from 2008, and actually had a good friend at the time who was mining it in their apartment, and I'd be there 2 or 3 times a week, and I just thought it was a load of rubbish and made the apartment really hot. I massively regret that now, obviously. So I was, very aware of crypto and then blockchain sort of a few years later, but my career path at the time was far away, very, very traditional private equity, recruitment before that. So sales and then some traveling and then sort of really kind of found my feet in an operational role within private equity. I worked at a company called HG Capital and then Bain Capital, which most people will know. So I was very used to the constraints of a traditional formal work setup. And my role initially 10 plus years ago was as an executive assistant. I worked very closely with people from all levels, sort of partners, MDs and down. And I was responsible and involved in a lot of really high level important execution on projects, from hiring cycles to HR processes to large scale events. So I was doing a role, and I was always somebody to put my hand up to help out, etc. But unfortunately, in that very firm structure, when you're going outside of your scope and you're working at a higher level, there's not actually a growth path for you like you find in the decentralized world. So, and I was very, and I appreciate being told that when I was working in private equity. You know, I was sort of at every appraisal, I'd be thanked for going over and above and doing the extra work that I was doing and leading different initiatives. But it was very clear that, you know, there was a role and there was a sort of operations pathway, and I could do the higher level work, but I wouldn't be remunerated or recognized for it. And I had various difficulties and things in my younger life, which meant that I couldn't go down the doctoral path that I wanted. So I've always had this kind of desire to have a really not high flying financially, but I wanted to work really hard, and I have a lot to give. And so that was quite difficult, being sort of stuck in that structure. And so gradually I started to move from there into tech. And I started off working for Nicholas Zenstrom at Atomico. He founded Skype and then a very successful European VC fund. And then I moved over to Improbable, which was at the time gaming, and then moved into it was in defense and metaverse. And so that's when the sort of metaverse, blockchain, this sort of extra side of tech started evolving. And that was in sort of, that was just the beginning of the pandemic. At the same time, my partner at the time, now husband, was heavily embedded in the Web3 and crypto world, was a huge fan of Gavin Wood and Polkadot. And so even if I wasn't involved in it, it was very much sort of everyday conversation. I sort of understood quite a lot about it. And then I was headhunted for a role at Parity, which is the engine room, I call it, of Polkadot. So that's the engineering hub, founded by Dr. Gavin Wood and Bjorn Wagner. And I was hired to be Bjorn's sort of right-hand person, which I did for 2 years. So I became, although Polkadot received hundreds of millions of funding, and it was quite large already, 200 people maybe when I started, it was very, very much a startup vibe, young people working together, trying to figure something out in a brand new world as well as a brand new startup. And so I really cut my teeth there and had a baptism of fire, doing anything and everything from creating slides to present to Japanese government officials, to kind of traveling around the world, supporting Bjorn and supporting Polkadot. And so that was what I was doing whilst I was at Parity. So that's how I got involved. And yeah, it was catching. It was the freedom of being able to really stretch and test my skills. There wasn't a day that you weren't learning and picking up something new and meeting somebody different. And that was the real pull for me, and still is. Traditional paths where you have to decide a certain subject that you want to study at 14, which will ultimately then lead to you doing A-levels, which will then lead to you doing a degree. And if you don't make those decisions, or like me, you had things standing in your way, that doesn't allow, the world closes quite quickly. And what I love about decentralization and the whole concept is that it takes away those restraints.
Very much. I similar experience growing up before I got into crypto was I had to do the project manager route because I barely graduated college, and there was no way I could do continued studies because my GPA was so bad. But project management was one of those that was certificate led, and they kind of had a loophole where to get a certificate you had to have experience, but the experience you had to have a certificate. So navigate that, but eventually got into consulting and just loved the whole aspect, because this is where like meritocracy takes flight, I would say. And I actually have done some governance analysis stuff, and I'm very intrigued with the system y'all set up in Polkadot, because it's kind of meritocracy on chain, if you can dabble a little bit into that.
Yes. So it's a difficult one because I know that Gavin has worked tirelessly for most of his, I think, adult life, toying with governance structures and wanting to create something that I believe genuinely is good for the better of the world. And so Polkadot governance system aims to instill a voice and a vote for everybody, but it is ultimately controlled by those with more tokens. And you can't get away from human nature. So I think the positives are, as I've already laid out. The pitfalls, and obviously this is a very early new process, but the pitfalls are having uneven voting. And I do believe that if you invest more, then maybe you should have more votes, but maybe it's investing more time also, or more of your skill set, etc. It doesn't have to be just financial. I believe that you have people, no one's an expert on everything. So you have everybody voting on marketing, business development, events, the technology, everybody has an opinion, and not necessarily as educated as one might want when you're spending that sort of money and making these sorts of decisions for ultimately what is a multi-billion-dollar company. And then the third piece is this popularity contest. I sort of believe that the number one currency in the world is and always will be kind of cool, being likable. That's what people strive to have. That's what they buy when they are the wealthier they get. And you can't escape that. And so the clicks form, particularly because it's completely decentralized, it's spread all over the world. Everybody has their pockets of people. And you can go from being, the absolute number one in the ecosystem to being somebody who, everyone kind of turns against. And so I don't think necessarily people are judged on the work they do, and that is further skewed by the financial element of it. But it's a fantastic experiment, and I think there's a lot of good in it. So I do want to say that they're definitely moving in the right way, but there need to be more checks and balances.
Yeah, completely. Well, and I think that's where a lot of these highlights are, because it's kind of, you get to experiment with real world government structures in a more safer environment to try and prove the concepts. Where Cardano kind of adapted a US government model too, where three bodies of government, not really an executive function, with less of the cons, but the bad politics of human nature slowly comes in, and you get popularity contests and fund me or we walk, stuff like that. So, with that, I know big theme I always ask about is open source sustainability, especially when you're talking about programs and structures, because what I love about Web3 is everything's based on an open source protocol, and there's different tribes and knowledge and things like that, and taking care of that. And this is where we actually get to prove the concept, because Web2 is also focusing on that, trying to, like the open source endowment fund, where there's a stock portfolio that gives dividends to critical projects. Polkadot was in a situation too where y'all had you have a treasury too, similar to Cardano, and it allows you to fund public goods and stuff. I'm curious, any experimentation y'all did with funding open source work and the programs that y'all developed as well.
So essentially we're talking about open source sort of sustainability and governance and how closely tied they are. I think so I think they are innately tied together. You can't have one without the other, because open source doesn't maintain itself. So even if the code is open, the maintenance is still labor. So somebody has to do this work. Documentation is labor, security is labor, community supports labor. All of this is labor. And I think one of the issues comes back to, again, the governance part is where it decides whose work is valuable and whose isn't, and whether it should be paid or not. If I open a shop and anybody can sort of help themselves and change the layout, etc. But if it runs out of food and I decide to stock it, but then no one pays me, then you end up in this loop. And it's this idea of mercenaries versus missionaries. And this was a very heavily touted phrase in Polkadot. And yes, I mean, I'm always someone who has gone over and above. I think that's the one thing, whatever anybody would have to say about me in my, entire working history, it would be that I, go over and above and give you every drop I have. And I think that is the missionary part. If I was working 40 hours a week, then that's the standard part. But the bit you do for love is all the extra hours, all the traveling, all the initiative taking, all the kind of the extra bits. But I think that core does need to be recognized. And if these governance systems are poor at recognizing the work, then that open source infrastructure becomes fragile. And that's exactly what we're seeing with the validators now. Because it's happened with the likes of us, the project managers, the organizers, the kind of the executors on the ground and in the public sphere. And the devs have been protected to a great extent until now. But I think we're starting to see it impact there as well. I think what needs to happen is the governance part needs to be taken as seriously as the open source code. Makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Well, and we did a little pilot experiment. We called the paid open source model to test things and try to find out, because Germany's sovereign tech agency has done very good about evolving the sustainability narrative. And throwing funding at projects. But I've talked with some of those projects too, and money changes the dynamics of an open source stewardship culture quite heavily, between those who take the money, those who don't. So we experimented to where the compensation towards individuals went towards that part-time basis. So that way you're compensating them for the regular work that they do, but they keep the open source citizenship and passion to keep going. Because if it turns into a full-time job, then it becomes kind of a different thing.
Yeah, and but you do need some people that are. I mean, the technical fellowship
Yeah.
is a full-time role, and the salaries are taken. These people also work at parity, a lot of them, and so that could on paper be called double dipping. I personally don't. I think that each one of them is worth every penny that they're paid. They're super important. But I think it's this constant questioning about whether what you're worth, it's something that was said to me years and years ago, because I grew up in a family of doctors, and I've always felt like a bit of a black sheep, and I wanted to change the world, and I really thought that maybe Polkadot would be the place where I could get on board with people who want to do the same. But something that always stuck with me is like, what is the value of a life? Like, is my life less valuable than one of my parents or my siblings' lives because they're a doctor? And I found this exact same dynamic in the one place I hoped it wouldn't be. And that's really, really difficult. Obviously, different jobs should be paid different amounts because they're different skill sets, but ultimately Web3 is still stuck in the dark for a reason, and that's because all these other skill sets are not being recognized. And actually, it was interesting you mentioned Germany, because Germany actually already looks after its employees incredibly well. So I'm not sure in the US, but in the UK, and it's starting to change now, but you had to work at a company for 2 years before you had any protection. And that is, there are changes starting to happen. Whereas in Germany, you're protected from the beginning. Actually, HR and the government policies are actually there to protect people, not companies. And I think, like, not just pay, but there's no one to go to for, bullying, harassment, just, general issues if needed. And I'm not talking about maternity pay and things like that. You make a decision if you're a contractor. But if there's bad things happening in the workplace, and this is only going to get worse because as we see the agentic world expand, who is going to be accountable? And it's just like, who is accountable with a Tesla if you buy it because of AI? Who's accountable if you're doing some work and something happens to you? What are your options? Or your employer hasn't held up their end of the bargain. So I genuinely believe this is a global issue, not just in blockchain, but in AI and generally how the world is going, as we have more and more people self-employed doing their own thing. And who's going to HR the agents? Who knows? But I think
that's
because taking everyone to court every time is just going to rinse the legal systems. It's money down the drain. But it's a really big issue, which I'm sure you're seeing in Cardano as well.
Well,
with change comes
even well, in US, I'd spent 25 years, basically most of my young life in Texas, and it is only small business, corporate friendly. Employees, basically, you work in the janitor's closet and hope you have benefits. But then we moved to California, and the culture is completely different, where companies are held responsible for basic things, where even PTO is guaranteed salary upon departure. So that's why one benefit of why I like working here, but especially when you're talking about like agentic things changing the nature of technology. There's actually a fun article I read too about Gemini is going from an open source to a closed source project, and Google is actually sunsetting it after a certain time. And now we need that transparency layer on AI systems if that's what we're determining, because only human governance is going to keep the AI accountable. I mean, you can read enough Anthropic studies where AI blackmails its CEOs, etc.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, I'm part of I'm working. I know somebody who is just started founding this Animoca Minds, which are these amazing new agents that you can have yourself, and it's your mind, and you can have different minds for doing different things, and they're constantly working in the background. But then you could have a mind as well, and our two minds could work on a project together and come up with their own thing. So this is already sort of happening, and again, who's accountable, who's responsible, is that work done? It's all these questions. And what I have learned in the last few years, because just to preface this with, after I left Parity, because Polkadot fully decentralized, rather than taking the safe option and going and just either finding another job in Web3 or elsewhere, I decided to become a decentralized agent. And I think Pretty much is because what I was saying is technology is moving far, far faster than the human framework, as is always the case. So in the UK, as I said, we've got these policy changes that are happening where I think they come into effect in September, where you are kind of protected on some level. You can't just get fired out of the blue beyond the 2 years. I think it's from when you start. But that's archaic compared to where we are now. And it's taken, however, since working happened, it's always been 2 years, and we're only just catching up now. How long will it take for anything else to come in? And I really think we need to get ahead of it. I'm working quite a lot with the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and hoping to host hackathons and things. I'm attending quite a few dinners thanks to the very, very kind Dr. Lisa Cameron, and it's a fascinating world to be in. And there are people who are really pushing blockchain and AI agendas, which is fantastic, but they don't see all of the other stuff that happens around it. There was a dinner that I did a lot of the heavy lifting for at the House of Lords, and then I had hoped, because there's always this argument of whether it's payment up front, which you can do, or payment after work done. And I was hoping to go to OpenGov, but everything had changed by the time the event had finished. So, and many, many people just say, just get over it and move on. I've done that a few times now. And I also don't think change will happen if everybody does that. And putting your head above a parapet is scary. And I've definitely had it shot off a few times. But yeah, I think this is an important topic, and I think you feel the same.
Yeah, 100%. I do think compensation is due for work delivered, especially if there's an ecosystem-wide benefit. I mean, I'm a ruthless open source sustainability evangelist. So if things are being adopted and someone's work is being very fruitful, there should be some remuneration for that, period. Because public goods, there's an old analogy like cars. Basically, if a car is provided to somebody, like I think Russia had built a manufactured car where you actually had to mix gas and your diesel or something together to actually make the car run, because it was an open source free economy thing, where instead you had open innovation and cars got better that way. But this is what you get when government doesn't just uses and abuses open source tech without actually funding and innovation and getting things built. Maybe I need a better reference point. It's an old analogy I got to clean up. But
it's really interesting, and just we see it everywhere. This kind of dismissing of the human side. The CEO of Bolt just announced that he'd fired his whole HR team because people are the problem. It's sort of happening everywhere, and I'm sure that this whole podcast will fall on so many deaf ears, but and I know people think we've gone too far and we've gone woke, etc. These are just basic human protections, and I think, like you said, everybody deserves to be paid for work done. And then you come back to the people part. So what is considered successful? Like the work I delivered on the Ambassador Fellowship, I believe I delivered everything promised and was told I was, but there were people who didn't believe that I didn't, but it was funded up front. So who decides this sort of thing? So this is where it starts to get complicated. And the whole point about having these DAOs is that they do offer that freedom and that great stuff that we talked about at the beginning, but then it also allows them to go and hide in the darkness. Under their pseudonyms and whatever else it is, and there's nothing you can do. And I can tell you 99.9% of the people that have seen me go through the last 14-15 months think I'm so foolish for still being here talking about it. But if we didn't believe in it, and we didn't believe in open source, like you say, and for you, as I'm a non very openly, happily non-technical person, but the freedom that this first gave me to really fulfill what I thought was my potential and reach places I never would have in the traditional world is something worth fighting for.
100%. Well, and I'm there with you. So open source actual experience. I'm only 5 years deep, give or take. But I do consider myself a veteran because I didn't go to university for this stuff. I just studied and was humble enough to learn from all of these experts that Web3 ecosystems are bringing together during this whole big experiment, because it pulls all the great minds together. And I'm not technical either. I'm just a project manager, but I'm good at driving ships in those sails. And those people still need compensation. And I think work is due to be remunerated if the system is being adopted by the government itself. If your ambassador program is in effect and it's running, compensation is due. That's how projects work. Like, we have a decentralized engine, or used to before I got ported over, called Catalyst, where a lot of funding was thrown towards MVPs and stuff. And a lot of those projects got built and then never utilized for anything. We had one project that was built to reward bounty payments in note of currency if a PR got merged for a feature enhancement. It wasn't until we actually developed a bug bounty thing related to open source sustainability that tool was actually being utilized. So, but for that project, doesn't necessarily need more funding until someone takes it, uses it, and it becomes a more critical piece. But if you have something like an SDK that is a part of everything and the original maintainer left, you should go do an effort, try to compensate that guy for his work, or find someone to keep them around. Very much same mindset there.
Sorry, I know Catalyst well because actually one of the people I worked closely with and who was also on the advisory board was one of the leading guys at Cardano working on Catalyst. Because I've always been a big proponent of cross-chain working as well, because I think one of the other big issues with Web3 and why it's sort of got the outward reputation that it has, and one of the reasons that kind of takes away from a lot of the good is that everyone is so siloed and competing against each other. And I understand banks compete against each other, etc. But this is meant to be a movement for the greater good, for fighting against, the institutions, etc. But if, Polkadot, Cardano, Solana, Ethereum, they're all so busy fighting against each other and battling to come out with something, no one comes out on top. So although the Ambassador Fellowship didn't go the way that I would have hoped, and the manifesto still stands strong. It's a great 19-page read if you're interested. I'm really proud that we managed that, and we did do some cross-chain engagement, and I know that the person that we were working with was very excited about what we were doing and had hoped to take some of the learnings over to Cardano. So
yeah, well, and I'm doing the same thing. So I've learned, especially Cardano, I will say is, I wouldn't call it toxic, but very opinionated compared to a lot of other ecosystems, because we just got a lot of the degens and what did I call them? The anarchists against every established government process. So, but I'm starting to learn too that every ecosystem, the only way we're going to succeed, because central banks will all work together to push against the narrative of a decentralized system. And so as our own consensus layer is decentralized, all our L1s and all our government or decentralized government should be working towards a similar ethos to actually battle against that centralized system. And I think the common thing that at least that I'm trying to do is the one thing we all share in common is an open source language system. And especially as AI systems are going closed source, this is still a common factor of how we can still preserve the human identity and all the instruments that benefit humanity as a whole. That's why I like Filecoin too, and helping them preserve decentralized data and stuff like that. So if we can, what I'm trying to port with open source sustainability is using that as a common language so we can keep terraforming ecosystems to the same mindset. And I do praise the Linux Foundation for starting the LFDT, at least, to actually start building a nexus for all those Web2 giants to see this, with Hedera going over there midnight in Cardano, and hopefully a few others soon. But
I think
definitely agree with you there.
You talk about open source. Obviously, we're talking about the code, and it was the open source community, if you will, that attracted me. And I believe that the two should go hand in hand. And there's so much. Even if you couldn't turn, we're always going to be in competition with the banks and the institutions, etc. But government, at least government in the UK and the US, is on is on our side. Maybe because they know they can't fight it. Bitcoin is here to stay. There's nothing they can do to stop it. But at least that you can attract the talent, and the talent. I started to work in crypto just at the beginning of the last bear market. So I have never been in a bull run. I've never seen money raining down. And I think that's also a reason probably that I'm more frustrated about not just not being paid what I should be paid for work, but also I'm glad because that was never a driver. Like I've never seen something 10x, 20x, 100x ever. There was a little flurry in I think November 2024 where I saw a little bit of a rise, but otherwise I've never worked in that. But there are so many other reasons for talent to join this space, but and one of the reasons I think is that there are so many super young people in this space who've not had big careers since. There was a lot of money blown into the space in 2020 and 21, and it's left all these kind of half-baked projects and people got hired and fired. Again, it's just no consideration for people and their lives and their livelihoods. And I've probably never met people that, yes, there's a lot of what they call them, what's the degen grifters. I'm sure there are grifters, but generally the people I've worked with, I've generally seen some of the hardest working, at least most dedicated people, ride or die people. And that should really be harnessed. And the other big thing that is this separation between were you pre-2021 or post-2021, because then you're either an OG or you're a newbie. And, again, I would love to see those lines blurred because, it would be nice to not have the news every other day being, Web3's over, blockchain's over, crypto's over, somebody else has been screwed over. Just get a little bit more grown up.
Well, I fight the narrative because Blockbuster used to be the big movie rental place in the US. There's still one standing that's a single franchise out. So crypto will always be this, even post quantum hacks or whatever. The code still lives on. So I use that. But I really think like the social media giant phase when I was young, I think we're past the MySpace stage. We're kind of in the Facebook era, and then we're going to be going into the next level of different things, because what I'm happy about too is also the concept of decentralized identity, digital passports between things, starting to own more of your own privacy, especially when it comes to like just registering anything with the government. You're giving up all your data. And me wanting to join a decentralized institution, I don't want to give all of that up. And that does throw in the complexities too when you're talking about how do you hold people accountable to stuff, because it's all hidden per se, but there still needs to be the human factor that is respected also within the system, like you're saying, because we're here to build things that right the wrongs that were done in traditional systems.
And blockchain should be able, like, I wouldn't be in this, like everything that I did in Polkadot whilst I was a decentralized agent was done on chain. So technically the work was done, it was put on chain, the money was given on chain, but the interactions, the conversations, the decisions that happened in private were not on chain. And actually, if you have that infallible ledger, like it makes decisions and lawmaking and all these things so much easier. And as I say, I'm non-technical, and so I often, I see a world in which blockchain can absolutely revolutionize the public sector, particularly the NHS with records and things like that. But it takes someone to want to use it for that, and not just either A, want to tinker, or B, build more DeFi, and actually, really use it for good. Which is why, despite everything, I do think that is Dr. Gavin Wood's aim, and I do hope that we see really positive stuff come out that's not just big lame crypto conferences, and it's fun at the time, but it's also it's not surprising that the rest of the world, the rest of the non-Web3 people think that it's all just a bit of a waste of space. Yeah, I think that human accountability piece, and then obviously you put on top of that IP. So I work in the creative space at the moment with a company called Playground, which is a home for creators to grow and monetize their communities. But it's fully built on Web3 rails. So it's built on an Ethereum layer 2 blockchain. But you're talking about kind of your identity, owning your own identity. That most people don't care about that, unfortunately. I think they will in the future, and you do if you live in certain parts of the world, but a lot of people don't. But when you start talking about IP and owning your short film, owning the song that you wrote, owning that sort of stuff, that starts to be more of a hook. But it's kind of, how do you explain it how do you explain Web3 in a way that doesn't just put people off because it's crypto? But I am starting to see in this creative industry something that is looking after people as well, and not just DeFi. And this is the whole community piece that people were looking for years and years ago, and has kind of fallen off. I don't know why.
Well, and you had mentioned open source. It does refer to core protocol, but even a step above that, especially from my discovery, is it's all the community management layer that goes into it, because it's its own governance process. And Denise Cooper, wonderful lady, if you ever get a chance to meet her, she founded InnerSource with Tim O'Reilly. And it was all about how to build that similar culture when they were still open source versus closed source in the early days. And InnerSource is how you could take that community engineering practice and bring it internally, so that one team on one payroll can actually collaborate with another team on a different payroll and get the systems working. And then you can build open source communities and stuff like that. Crypto people, Web3, they do it without even realizing it's open source structure, because we're all about reinventing the wheel sometimes too much. And they don't realize that we already have all the Web2 established practices that we can come and formalize and build and innovate. So that was the Cardano piece. Is like, oh, this stuff already exists, just port it.
You're so right about trying to reinvent the wheel. And actually, it just made me think, because one thing that this open source has meant open salary. And so all thoughts about, because this is why big companies keep salaries a secret. Because so Web3 was meant to do the opposite. It was meant to say, screw you to big industry and to the institutions. And actually what it's done is it's ripped off the cover, shown us all what we all earn or want to earn. And we've just gone back to our real basic instincts of who should be paid what. And actually maybe that part of the wheel needs to go back on, but I don't know how, or people need a re-education. There's no such thing really in Web3. I did like salary surveys and things like that in order to figure out what I should be paid for various jobs. But it's a really interesting dynamic that it all boils down to money, no matter how much work you do. And I don't know how you change that. And I don't think open source can survive until there is a body that's not government elected, but it's government approved, where it's voted in and it kind of manages different, it presents a salary survey every year that's kind of the taken one, and everybody kind of agrees, and it's a panel of experts. I don't know that it needs to be voted in, the rolling board of experts that just take all the data. Maybe it's AI agents, they just pull all the data and they tell us what everyone should be paid, and then no one can have a go at them because they're AI. Well, depends who owns them.
Drag them to AI court.
I think we've shown that we definitely do. I believe in leaders and not management. I believe in leaders and mentors rather than management. And I think that Web3 is trying to get away from management, but you still need leaders. You still need people to learn from, and to grow from. And I think we need more experienced people in the space who have had a whole life. In the
very much
world.
Well, and to replace management with coordinators, I think, is a better terminology. People who can just connect the dots and have things going, but they're not anything that they're supposed to do, or so fun thing I'm doing in Cardano right now was I instilled a open source pilot program, ran into some different actors that made the budget not run so well. So I built a new structure around it that ties in the governance layer, that on-chain governance builds a specific mandate for a certain term for this decentralized open source program office to run the civic institution of the sustainability programs, open source stewardship, etc. Doesn't own anything, all projects to own their stuff. And they have to adhere to the guidelines if they're participating in the compensation programs, and the programs hit different aspects that projects need. But the fun thing is that it's operator replaceable. So the whole thing is the DOSPO doesn't have to worry about every year needing treasury funding. They'll have it for 3 years, but they have to deliver ROI and a mandate. Otherwise, the governance layer can sunset them and or the whole program and return the funds. So it's this accountability layer, transparency, and execution. And it gives it legitimacy behind it, so you don't have that central actor capture risk. But how do we do similar structures for all these other things, especially around salary, because that's the touchy bit as you're talking about. So
and you just built that. You saw a problem and you rectified it.
Yeah. So I joined to manage the open source repository transition. Originally, we tried to do it at the Linux Foundation. That's when they were still skeptical of crypto. So we built our own MBO to mirror off of them, but also a little bit of Apache. So it's kind of neutral ground in the philosophy. And then later on, Hedera ended up being the first project to work with the Linux Foundation. And now they're kind of a steward in that process. But within the MBO that we set up, I set up a program to run with a committee. And because the MBO also manages all the budget admin, it was like $264 million they had to administer. A lot of things started to slip through cracks and stuff. And so the program didn't flush out the way it was supposed to. So from that, I was like, well, if this is the structure we're living in, how do you hit all the philosophies that the core ecosystem is going to want and still make sure you can get outcomes? So worked with a bunch of experts in different spaces and then did that. So it was kind of one thing to another to another. And now I'm trying to evangelize that. And I do have the Frontiers Lab, which the podcast is named after, is trying to build this reference architecture for other ecosystems to work together. And that's how I'm trying to build a consensus layer. So here I built one governance primitive of how you manage open source via the DOSPO, but here is a program architecture on sustainability programs that anyone can come add their use cases, and you can piecemeal what you want to do, but it's supposed to be proven architecture piloted in different ways than just build more open source ethos. I'm not getting paid for that. I put in a proposal for Cardano to do it. I'm still going to do my work if they don't. Filecoin is my mainstay for the moment. So that's where, but my open source passion isn't going to stop on this. So that's where that's what I love about Web3 is you can just do this.
Yeah. So I had two thoughts on that. My first was going to be, so how have you got paid? It's actually a very good point, because Filecoin is your job and you get paid and you do this on the side in your spare time, which is a hobby, which is a passion, which is, and that's those extra hours that I was talking about. If you are doing something full time and that is your full time role and you're responsible for budgets and a team and all of this sort of thing, then that is different. But yeah, I am not against people doing things, and and hopefully someone will recognize it. But you've taken a punt on not. You've gone in eyes open. The other thought,
and I put it's a dividing line. So all the brainstorming, porting resources, all that together, that's my open source passion. But if you want me to implement it, there is a part-time cost basis that I put in the proposal. But I will always be available for free consultation for anyone who wants to run it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still the same on with the ambassadors. If anybody reaches out, I will always have time. But the other thing that I wanted to say is, this is also the beauty, and this is what's worth fighting for, that you, a guy who is clearly incredibly bright, but could have, because you didn't graduate and you didn't go down the path you wanted, if it wasn't for this space, I find it hard to see how you would be able to flourish and put all of your intelligence and skills to work as you have been able to. And I just think that's a really, really lovely story. You saw a problem, you're fixing it, you're doing things you never would have been able to do before. And hope the missing piece is that work, if it succeeds, if it's a failed project, then it was your own thing and you decided to do it. but hopefully, that does need to be recognized and paid. And at the very least, you should be treated well and respectfully and for what you've done, etc. So that's that last missing piece. And I do hope you are remunerated for it, because it sounds like you're solving for a real problem. But yeah. I think
that's right.
Yeah,
somewhere down the line, but
I think
sure.
there's a big, I've just thought, I think there's a big, we seem to be quite similar. And I think people like us probably get more stuck in these cycles than others because we're so kind of thankful to this space and for the opportunities that we feel we wouldn't have had, that maybe we're more willing to put ourselves out there and do things that other people wouldn't. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a kind of thought that's come to me in the moment. Because without any rules and boundaries, people who don't necessarily feel that they belong or they're proving themselves more than others, it's harder for us to have a voice and push forward, without kind of representation. So that's quite it just kind of came to me, and that's not anybody's fault. That's but when you're putting a lot of time and resources and money and things into things, that's where it becomes a bit more difficult.
Yeah, well, and I started decentralizing all the different things I wanted to do, which is why I moved them, because I want to get rid of network outages altogether when you're trying to access things. So Filecoin's perfect for that, as well as preserving the human identity with AI generating more stuff than humans nowadays. But then even orchestrating how you do capital asset management for water infrastructure projects, so the money's not lost in different things, keep that on chain, transparent, etc. And then free consultation for core projects within Cardano. Like, I've moved past Cardano, but I still want to serve because you're just thankful to it. And this is the place where all these experimental ideas come in and actually become established practices. So in a way, it's not changing the whole world, but it is changing a world, the work that you get to do. And everybody embraces each other. Even if there's punching and fighting, everyone usually resolves things, or they start their own chain. Just kidding.
And how do you find the male female kind of divide treatment relationships within the ecosystem? Because obviously it's very heavily male dominated, and we don't spend a lot of time together face to face in person. So I think all ecosystems are the same, and I don't want to go down a sort of heavily women's rights route, but I'm just sort of interested because it's another thing that makes it quite difficult to necessarily succeed in a decentralized ecosystem, in my opinion.
From my view, I think you can't get rid of the biases that follow human nature for some reason. Just people have that way. And then it's also depending on how people's political views and things like that, it all comes back into the system. But I think the decentralized aspects have a way of filtering that out that traditional companies don't necessarily are able to do per se. And that merit-based thing helps build and cascade stuff. So I do think there's more opportunity here, but you still have the same clashes. And it is male dominated. So like even my wife's had that issue too, where she's the young girl joining a team of like 24 older male project managers and had to fight to get her opinion in because there's just that bias that's naturally there. But you can succeed. But she's in the cybersecurity space, so different realm. But I do think there's higher levels for respect here, but you still same problems. Hopefully there will be better structures to manage it.
And if you did have an issue as a kind of decentralized agent, not necessarily gender related, but whatever it was, whether it was, as I said, like harassment or bullying or anything sort of that you would usually have a protective HR or somebody you could go to, is there anything in Cardano like that, or is it similar situation to Polkadot?
I would say we haven't crossed that line yet. You do have the on-chain government, so there is a constitution that's in effect at least, but it's more raining towards proposals and work done that way. So if and there's a code of conduct kind of built into that, and actions aren't allowed to deprecate the chain, etc. So we do have a constitutional committee that can vote on things like that, and you could submit an info action. So one funny dumb thing that happened was someone put in an info action called the Charles Hoskinson Transparency Act, wanting him to disclose everything he had ever done on chain. It didn't pass, and it was viewed unconstitutional. So, there's these kind of mechanisms. It's just degens doing stuff for the fun of it.
Yeah.
But I do think that's the closest thing we have towards something like that. But even like myself, I did try to run a program. I left to actually ensure that I could run this program effectively, and that's where I'm leading all this DOSPO stuff. So you do have that freedom to try and jump off and start something new, and then if you can wrap the support of the community behind the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's what I hope the Ambassador Fellowship would be, because like what you are talking about, like the whole idea is that the governance element was removed. So once you were an ambassador, it was just like the technical fellowship. So there were quite rigid-ish sort of. There were 6 different ranks, and they were all. But they were the manifesto was very flexible, because you need to be able to grow and ebb and flow with how the ecosystem's working, with economic times, etc. As you know, the hope was that we would grow, to hundreds of thousands, if not tens of thousands, and people would climb up the ranks. And we didn't build in demotion, but you could kind of stay. And we also wanted to make it so that it wasn't that you had to do a certain amount of work, because it was more of a missionary thing. It was more of a status thing. You would be able to go to a conference and be like, I'm a rank 3, rank 4 ambassador. But if you wanted to do more, then we had this Fragment Initiative Fund, which we wrote the whole program for, but unfortunately it's not been implemented yet. But this was where kind of full-time agents could apply for a funding slot, and that slot would run like almost like a paycheck. So say you wanted to do work for $10,000 a month, then you would apply, and these fragment slots would be reviewed like every 3 months, and it would be fragment voting. So no one could vote nay. They could only vote yes or not vote at all. And then they say you had 10 tokens, you would have to spread those 10 tokens, either 10 on 1 or 1 on 10 different people. And whoever got the votes for that quarter would then know that they were guaranteed the salary. And obviously, if you didn't deliver by the end of that, and all of your work would be on chain, because you would have made your manifesto, you would have promised what you were going to do, then you wouldn't get voted in next time. But if you were doing a good job, then it's likely that you would have some sort of, you would both be accountable, and you would not have to worry about going and getting a topped up proposal every time. But also, with the more work you did, the more your reputation would build. And the whole idea around it was reputation, was making sure that if people were sort of missionaries, that they knew what they were getting into, and they had an opportunity to also do other things. And then to also allow these global initiatives like Polkadot Brazil and Polkadot Africa and Polkadot Poland and all of the different ones, that you could put in for a collective funding as well. And so again, you would have a constant sort of funding for different things. So that's all in the manifesto, and that's what we built. And we built the framework, and we had a really detailed onboarding framework, and a sort of a transition when you go up the ranks, and we had mentoring and pop-ups and on all sorts of stuff. So that's and I hope that one day what we did, because all the work is there, it's open source, it's all there, the manifesto's there, the entire notion is built out, all of the framework is built out. And I do think that is about as close as you'll get, because it's people keeping people accountable. So the rank 6s, for example, have made their way up, and they've gotten there, and they have a certain level of trust, and everything is voted on. So if someone wants it to be promoted, then it will be voted on, and different ranks carry different weights. So as a rank 6, you might carry 50 voting points. As a rank 1, you might only carry 5. But the idea is that it would be a pyramid. So the rank 1s could outvote the rank 6s, but the idea is, if you're a rank 6, you wouldn't be that out of touch with what's going on. And I have not actually talked about it for a long time, and talking about it now makes me feel proud again, because I really think that it could solve a lot of what we've talked about, having humans govern humans. in a
Yeah,
non-hierarchical. It is hierarchical, but it's hierarchical through work and not through money.
yeah, a proven thing. I actually like your ambassador. I am gonna go read that after this because I know Cardano's ambassador programs are on the foundation. It's more of a traditional
Yeah.
ambassador program. Midnight has more of a degen one. I applied to it and just stepped out because it was not my taste of
Yeah.
how the marketing and stuff ran. But I do like your system because also one of the programs we initiated was a maintainer retainer thing, which is kind of like the staple of the sustainability program, where a lot of funding, especially grant stuff, especially towards open source like maintenance work, is always delivery oriented milestone stuff, when actually what it should be is maintenance and continuity focused. So you're paying for the availability of the person to be there to do basic general stuff, not that they have to build and deliver a feature, because then they don't look at the issues and resolve stuff.
Yeah.
So that's what this OMF framework tries to do, and then attach it based on traditional life cycles of projects, where they are in the maturity scale. So very similar systems, but the maintainer retainer was good because it allowed you to keep the original person and compensate them for the work that they're doing, but also brought in a slot for a community person, which we put on the contribution ladder as a trusted committer, a step below maintainer, to where they get mentored to get rid of the problem with like the Linux kernel maintainers that are aging out. So you have the next person there, and a mentorship cycle, like what you're describing your ambassador program. But it actually came to be fruitful because the best use case I have, can't disclose the project, but a core person of feature knowledge, tribal stuff, he was let go from the sponsor org of the project, even though it's under an MBO. And so there's a move to remove him from the project altogether because security concerns from the core developers. We instituted this maintainer retainer program because it puts him under legal protection that he's a contract of the MBO to do that and be in the release meetings and stuff like that, so that he can't just be removed from corporate politics. So it's like these are also programs can be safeguards against centralization actors and stuff like that. So it's one of those keep open source citizenship as a primary thing, but obviously now you have a contract to keep him liable for bad actions. So it covers both grounds, but yeah.
Well, I had the opposite. So somebody who I work with, who actually was removed, who was doing the same role as me, and I was asked to finish the work, which I did. But so I guess there was a protection against a bad actor, but because he'd been, I guess, let go, and it's a decentralized thing, which is and it was with the contract was kind of with the DAO, and it was this advisory board, and they were nervous to tell the community that they'd essentially, let somebody go, because do they actually have the right to do that? And so everybody just hid and ran. But yeah, and I like I say, I do hope that somebody takes it up. I would love to install it somewhere. I'd love to see it go on Polkadot. But
talking with you, I'm wondering if that's actually another thing too. Like the whole DOSPO thing's meant to be that coordinator role, to where they enter and execute the contracts, and they're tied into the authority of another body that's on chain. So I'm wondering if you could do a DAO with an execution body that's replaceable with the same mechanisms. That way that you can solve this accountability situation per se.
And this would be what the rank 5s and 6s are in the Ambassador Fellowship. They can also be like the community can vote to remove them with an on-chain vote. They can also only be promoted when you get that high up to rank 5 and 6 with a community vote. But it can't be a popularity vote because because of all the work you've done is on chain. Everything you've done in the fellowship is on chain. So just because someone doesn't like you, they can't be putting a big fat vote against you. But yeah, I like that idea. I like the idea of there being some sort of body like that as well. Within the UK, that isn't led by government, but is approved by. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting the government and the higher powers to approve of what you're doing, because it makes things a lot easier. You don't want them to interfere. You want them to approve, because you have to have some source of truth. And ultimately, we've just, in some ways, you could argue that we've swapped the Morgan Stanleys and the and the Bank of England and all of those for the Polkadots and the Ethereums, and it's just a different group of very intelligent people making decisions for the rest of us. But I think an ambassador program, maybe it shouldn't be called ambassador program. Maybe it should just be called the people's program, or the community
the commons
program.
or yeah, all kinds of swanky language.
Yeah, community commons, because maybe it's a wider Web3, a wider Web3.
Well, I think
there's people
you
from
can
all
argue it's a governance primitive too. I would say it's like a staple thing that should be in every architecture. So you're making me think of adding that potentially to the framework too, because a lot of the OMF has to do with, since it's mostly taxpayer funds, how do you support open source projects, but how do you also support the products building and connecting it? Because them driving TVL is what builds the treasury mechanisms back. But you have to use it to where it's not taxpayer funds directly go to the profit of that company, but different supporting mechanisms. So I'll tie in the ambassador thing too, because their success depends off the marketing done, building the business leads for the ecosystem in general. So
do check out the manifesto, and I can send you the Notion links and stuff. So it's on GitHub, not to be confused with Gary's manifesto, which is also on GitHub for the technical fellowship. And the technical fellowship works very well. So we know that, but that is a bit different in that it's salaried. But we followed a very similar path because Gavin knows what he's doing. So no, I'd love to chat more about that. And it's really nice with all the strife and troubles that have come in some ways. I'm so proud of it, and it's one of the best things I've ever done. And talking about it again makes me excited.
Yeah, well, even myself, I'm not really involved in Cardano per se, other than this proposal, and I serve on their TSC through the MBO. But Cardano's on fire because it's budget season, so there's a lot of proposals like fund me, don't fund me. Politics is high, but I still love the ecosystem. It's still a place to go to, and it's a. I think someone called it the science coin recently, just because they're academic, peer-to-peer, etc. But and then I'm very interested with Polkadot because doing governance work, I was studying a lot of y'all's frameworks and stuff, and now you've intrigued me specifically on this ambassador piece. So I'll definitely do that. But thank you for taking, I think we're close to time, but what is, to end things off, what is a fun fact that normal people don't know about you?
Oh God, I hate this question. I'm thinking of myself.
I found out one of the guys from the Apache Foundation likes to do LARPing in his spare time, or live action role play. He's 40 some years old, so I didn't know that. So
that can't be your fact though, that you know someone who has a fun fact.
No, my fact is I have 9 sisters. So my mom is West Virginia Hill Country, my dad is Cowboy Country. So I have family members with no teeth and beer guts, and then just family members with no teeth. So 2 different sides of country.
I love that. Well, I will. So I am married to a Western fanatic professional poker player, seeing as we've gone down the Western route. So we spend a lot of time going to country and Western events, anywhere we can get a bit of a fake cowboy action here in the UK.
Believe it or not, the best barbecue sauce I had was in London.
Really?
There was some pub that just had Tennessee Memphis barbecue sauce. It was the best barbecue sauce I've ever had. He beat Texas. So
you should put that now as a clip at the beginning of the podcast that people have to listen all the way to the end to find out where the restaurant is.
Yeah, I gotta remember it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. Hopefully we speak again, and who knows, maybe we work together on this.
I'll stay in contact for sure.
Piece. Awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.